So your first stint was that you were the first female engineer at Facebook, right? Yeah, I know Mark came to your wedding in India. Are you still in touch with him?
Yeah, we kind of grew up together. So for the last 20 years, I have been in touch with him.
What was the work ethic like at Facebook?
Facebook was not like work. Everybody who was working on Facebook at that time was building a product for themselves.
I think the best impression I can get of how the entire story of Facebook came out was through the movie, The Social Network.
Which was the best decision Mark made, because then there was no internal gripe about the movie or questions or whatever it is. So the whole company went and watched that movie together for the first time.
I think in the movie, Sean Parker gets his visiting cards for Mark and he gives them those visiting cards where it's written, "I'm CEO, bitch." Is that really true?
It's true, I have one of those cards.
These guys don't really care about the outside world. How does that sound like fun to you?
Great work only happens when you're able to focus on the work. In the real world, not in the movie, the way we would indicate that we are wired in is by putting our headphones on. And cool.
We're in the business of being cool. That's it.
Oh, you're in the business of being cool?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in the business of being hot.
What made you quit Facebook then?
So my whole goal was that I was going to start a company before I was 30 years old.
That he looked like a robot. That he's a robot. He's a cyborg. He's not human. He's an alien. Is that true?
I don't think so. And I think the most admirable quality about him is his capacity for learning.
Does Facebook really steal people's data?
Namaste and welcome to this episode of the Oddcast show. How do you become a dollar billionaire? What's the secret? Today I have a very odd guest because she's my childhood friend. She's my buddy and she's become a dollar billionaire. And she was the first female engineer at Facebook. Post which she's done a bunch of stuff. She's done a lot of innovative stuff in the tech world. And now she started a brilliant program called South Park Commons, which is a community of brilliant minds trying to figure out what's next and what's going to happen in the tech world. So welcome to the show, Ruchi. What's happening?
Thank you, Kunal. All great. Thanks for having me.
How's it feel to be back home in India?
It feels great. I haven't been back for 5 years. Pune is completely different. The one-way system is driving me crazy, but it feels great to be back.
But lesser homelessness over here, right?
Absolutely lesser homelessness.
Yeah.
More dignity here.
Yeah. So how much money are you making? For 5 years, you don't want to come back to your country and all that. What's up?
I made my money when I was very young, in my 20s. I'm still living off of that money. I don't make any money, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
We'll get into that, to SPC later. But I want to start with Facebook. So your first stint was that you were the first female engineer at Facebook, right? So how was that journey? I know Mark came to your wedding in India. And, are you still in touch with him?
Yes, absolutely still in touch with him. His kids are my kids' friends. We're family friends in many ways. And yeah, we kind of grew up together. So for the last 20 years, I have been in touch with him. And
you're going to get him on our show, right?
Hopefully one day.
Yeah.
The key is to get him to India first.
He'll come. We're starting something in India also, which we'll talk about later. So I'm sure he's going to come. How was the environment at Facebook then? When you first started out versus what it is now, if you know of what's happening now?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things is that when I graduated, and I know Suved, you're in college, when I graduated from college, we were just coming off the 2003, 2004 recession. I'm dating myself now. And I couldn't get a job, actually. And again, Suved, you probably know, but if you're in the United States and you're a student and you don't have a job, you can't really stay in the United States. So I kind of stayed on for another 6 months to finish my master's. And I became an expert at interviewing, and then interviewed at a lot of different companies and landed actually with 22 job offers in those 6 months. But the best thing that happened to me was that in those 6 months, Facebook launched at colleges. And had I graduated earlier, I would have never seen Facebook. I would have never known what Facebook was. So in those 6 months, I was a very avid user of Facebook. In fact, I was using it more than email. I was using it more than an internal chat system, which was Zephyr at that time. I was literally using it more than anything else. So when I came to California, I actually got a job with Oracle and I was working with Oracle. And I heard that, Mark was no longer at Howard and they had opened up offices in Palo Alto in California. And then through a friend of a friend, I decided to go tour those offices. And the very first office was above a Chinese restaurant. They had a little chalkboard outside saying, looking for engineers. And I was walking up the stairs and this graffiti artist, David Cho, was painting the walls. And there's a great story behind him. And then I go upstairs and there are 3 or 4 people at every desk and the energy is amazing. You felt like you could slice it with a knife. And then I started talking to people there and I learned that none of these people worked at Facebook. They were all Stanford students just hanging out. And the number one problem Facebook had back then was that they couldn't hire anyone. It was a college-only website. So the only people who understood what it was college students, and they were still in school. And then everybody who was experienced working at Google or Amazon or any of these companies back then thought it was a trend or a fad, that it would disappear because it was for college. So they couldn't hire anybody at that point in time. And here I was, just freshly graduated. And I was like, this is the place that I want to work at. Now you'll find this really interesting. A lot of people asked me back then, which is why are you leaving this stable job, where you're making $85,000 a year, to join a company that nobody has ever heard about? And back then, I remember that my father had given me 1 year to stay in the United States. And he said, after 1 year, you have to come home and get married. So I was like, in that 1 year, I should just have a lot of fun. Let's maximize the fun factor. And the most fun place to work at will be Facebook. So I left my job at Oracle. And it was actually really hard to leave because I owed them $10,000, which I didn't have in the bank, and Facebook hadn't agreed to pay that. And I was like, we'll figure it out all later. Left. Facebook was so young then, they couldn't figure out my visa situation. So for 3 months I was jobless. And then ended up joining Facebook. But I'll tell you, it was probably the best decision obviously made in my life.
What was the work ethic like at Facebook?
Facebook was not like work. Everybody who was working on Facebook at that time was building a product for themselves that they were obsessively using every single day. And nobody thought of it as a dating website or a fun website. The people who worked on it thought of it as a utility. We thought of it as being able to connect with our friends, for me, being able to keep up with my friends who are in India, seeing what people were doing, my family members and things like that. So, I'll tell you, me, for example, I would work every single day, all 7 days of the week. My work hours were 12 to 14 hours a day. I even worked on Christmas Eve, 24th and 25th of December, because I couldn't leave the country, again, because of visa issues. So I was working all the time, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like fun. Right. There was this funny story. In fact, it got written about in one of the books. Sometimes I would leave work at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And that time, Facebook was Palo Alto. I used to live in the city. It was a 50-minute drive. And I was driving in the middle of the night. I would fall asleep at the wheel, and then crash into barriers. And my mom, she freaked out. She was like, if you're going to continue this, you need to live right next to the office, so you stop driving. Right. And I did. And again, I would walk to work in my pajamas sometimes. So it didn't feel like work.
It was a chill scene, just chilling.
Yeah. And everyone was working all the time.
So I think the best impression I can get of how the entire story of Facebook came out was through the movie, The Social Network. Yeah. And in that,
I'll tell you something interesting about that movie. Sure. So when that movie came out, Aaron Sorkin was one of our favorite. It was made by Aaron Sorkin. And he also made West Wing. And all of us at Facebook were big fans of him. So while we were not pleased that he did the movie, we were huge fans of Aaron Sorkin. So as a company, we decided to go watch the movie together. Which was the best decision Mark made, because then there was no internal gripe about the movie or questions or whatever it is. So the whole company went and watched that movie together for the first time.
Right. So the impression I got through that is whenever the founders are coding on the software and or whatever they're making over there, and anybody comes in and says, "Hi, I'm Sued," they just do. And then they say, "Oh, I'm wired in, so you can't talk to me." So this is the kind of impression I got, that these guys don't really care about the outside world too much as normal people do. So how does that sound like fun to you?
First of all, great work only happens when you're able to focus on the work. And in the real world, not in the movie, the way we would indicate that we are wired in is by putting our headphones on. So if you have your headphones on, you're not supposed to disturb that person because that person is in flow. And again, like this concept of flow is like, comes all the way from yoga actually. So when you're in flow, like, you are being most creative, and you're doing your best work and you don't want to be interrupted then. So it's less about like not being in touch with the rest of the world, but more about like focus and being in the state of in the state of flow. We're definitely in touch with the rest of the world.
Okay. And how did you perceive Facebook back then? Did you see it being as big as it is today? Or did you have no idea and this was just some sort of pastime for you for that 1 year?
Initially, when we joined, and I will say this of like almost everyone who joined early, maybe with the exception of Mark, like nobody thought it would be as big as it eventually got. If we had all believed and known, then we would have all been oracles, and we would have been able to repeat the process multiple times. So nobody actually knew how big it was going to get in the very, very early days.
Including Mark?
I would say that Mark had this. First of all, like Mark is one of the greatest founders of our time. He had this incredible belief in himself and what he was building. And he got multiple $1 billion offers in the early days of Facebook. If it was any other founder, they would have immediately sold the company.
Yes.
And not only did he get those offers, but everybody who was quote and unquote senior at the company was trying to convince him to sell the company. And one day he walked into the office and like, he slammed one of these offers on the door. And nailed it in, and he said like, I'm never going to accept one of these offers. And that takes a lot of courage in those early days when you're in your early 20s to like turn down $1 billion when everybody who is experienced and like in industry for like 10 years is telling you to sell the company.
Right.
So he had an incredible amount of like self-belief and the ability to persevere. Now, did he know it was going to become as big as it did? Probably not, but like, did he have faith in himself? Yeah.
So, the movie, Sean Parker is a very big influence from outside who comes in and then he creates a rift between Mark and his CFO and all that. So did you see all that play out in real life? Did you see all that? Were you around then?
I was around then. I think that when I was actively working in the company, Sean Parker was no longer active. But when I like interviewed in the early few months, like he was definitely around then.
He was definitely around. And the CFO, I mean, like he's completely off it right now. The original CFO, the first CFO, who was his roommate in college, Mark's roommate.
I think that the movie got that wrong.
Okay, got it wrong.
Yeah.
All right. And what about, other influences from outside? Were there any other external factors that helped Mark, or was it just his own baby all the time?
He had a great set of co-founders. Dustin Moskowitz, for example, is an amazingly brilliant guy who has another company called Asana, which is also a public multi-billion-dollar company. But he had some like really good co-founders. Some of his early hires were really strong. And like he had a lot of help. Like there was a lot of churn in the beginning with management, but like, he stayed the course. But like, yeah, I don't think any one person can build a company alone, but like, all credit does go to him.
And the movie talks about that, the Winklevoss brothers, the twins, the Winkle Y as he calls them in the movie and makes fun of them. They created a lot of problems later on legally, as I understand, right?
I believe they did, but I didn't have exposure to it.
Okay, all right.
I mean, the only thing that happened is like we got, what's the legal term for it? Like, where they ask for your email and then they not like, they interview you and that kind of stuff. But that was all taking place on the legal front.
Mm-hmm. So now where do you see Facebook going now? Like now we're in 2024. This is 20 years ago. Now, where do you see Facebook? Because now a lot of people are, more on Instagram for the purpose of being social. They're more connected on Instagram and
So can I go back to the Winklevi thing?
Sure, sure.
I think the most interesting thing about the Winklevostrans or the Winklevi is that they only like slapped on a lot of the legal paperwork on Facebook after Facebook was significantly successful. So that wasn't happening in like 2004 or 2005. It happened like later.
When they saw it make money, they said,
exactly.
Okay, this is the time to,
exactly
get something out of it.
Exactly. So, I mean, I don't actually know the legalities behind it, but like, that was the reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm. So coming back to what I asked, what's then you said that, okay, you were using Facebook a lot because you could see, you could be socially connected to people in India, know what's happening with your friends, etc. and all that. Where do you see, like, what's Facebook today? Is it still the same? Is the purpose the same? Or because for that purpose, there are so many more apps now. There's Snapchat, there's Instagram, there's this, there's that, there's, TikTok. I don't know how TikTok works, but there are all these apps, right? There are all these platforms. So what's up with Facebook right now? Like what's it now?
So I don't work there, and I haven't worked there since 2010. So it's been about 14 years that I haven't been there. So I don't actually know how they think about it internally. I agree with you. I think there are a lot of other applications out there, but I think the most interesting thing here is that a lot of those applications are all under the umbrella of Meta, whether it's like Facebook or Instagram or Threads or WhatsApp, they're all under the umbrella of Meta. I think different demographics use different products. So Ved, for example, I don't think you use Facebook at all. But you probably use Instagram.
Yeah.
Like Kunal, I kind of see you on Facebook. I see your mom on Facebook. So like, I think it has more to do with your demographic, your age demographic, and like, where your own network is active. So for example, your mom's network won't be active on Instagram, but it will be on Facebook. And that's the social dynamics. I think the thing that people underestimate about Facebook is that when we were building the product, we weren't just like, heads down coders, like disconnected from the world building the product. We actually thought a lot about human psychology, which is very apparent in like these social applications. Like we thought about like, what do humans care about? Like, like how do they think about their relationships? Like their 1-degree connections, their 2-degree connections. Are they narcissistic? Are they vain? Like, are they really like philanthropic? So we thought a lot about human psychology and like how humans connect with their network around when building the product. And like that's very underestimated when people think about like Facebook.
That's not talked about at all. I mean, nobody knows this. Generally, people just think that, okay, it's just a social app. They just built it and it just clicked. But they don't, probably people don't realize what you're talking about, because even I didn't think of it this way, to be honest.
Yeah.
That there was so much of thought put into it. There was so much of human element or, human psychology that was considered to build a product like that.
Yeah. And none of us were psychologists. We were just using our own real life experiences. So for example, when we built Newsfeed, one of the things around Newsfeed, which is still like, existent on Facebook, was like very much like, what do people want? And what people wanted was information coming to them. So like Newsfeed, the original thinking was like, instead of going from like Kunal's profile to Suved's profile to find out what everyone is doing, like let me like summarize, like almost make a newspaper that is personalized. For me. But then you think about like, if I want a personalized newspaper, what do I care about? And the reality, and this is true of all humans, you care about yourself the most. Like it doesn't matter who else is there, but you care about yourself the most. Then you care about your 1st-degree connections, like, whether it's your girlfriend, whether it's your wife, whether it's your friend, whether it's your roommate. And then you start caring about 2nd-degree connections, like, a classmate or like a colleague or whatever the case might be. And then like people like maybe like you follow or you're interested in the work that they do.
Or one-time acquaintances or something like that.
Yeah. So you have these degrees of connections, and that's what like Newsfeed was, right? Like we were surfacing information about the people that you cared about. And all with the point of view that you care about yourself the most. And like, that's a very like, that's a very interesting way of thinking about technology products.
So what after, I mean, sounds like a lot of fun in terms of, when you were there, to build this whole product and, from scratch. What made you quit Facebook then?
It's very interesting. this is also not talked about very much, but Facebook was a very ageist company in the early days. So in the early days, we would hire a lot of young people because we thought that they had the time and the ability to devote all their time to the company. Obviously, that was wrong. Like, we had a lot of amazing senior experienced people afterwards. But in the early days, because we had that mentality, I was like, in my mid-20s, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to hit my late 20s soon. And if I don't start a company now, then I'll be 30 and I'll never start a company. So my whole goal was that I was going to start a company before I was 30 years old. And I needed a few years to get that company going. And that was basically the motivation for leaving.
So tell me something in the movie, coming back to the Social Network movie, in that there is a scene where, Sean Parker gets his visiting cards for Mark and he gives them those visiting cards where it's written, I'm CEO, bitch. Is that really true? Does that really happen, or is that just something?
It's true. I have one of those cards.
Okay, so we want to see that card. You need to send it to us so that we put it up on this video.
I'll have to look for it.
Yeah, it's so cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of Top Gun quotes.
Oh, really? Like, for example?
I can't remember. If one of you can look it up. Missiles, not guns. Do you guys remember that one?
Oh, yeah. You mean the Top Gun quotes, like you had them all over the Facebook office?
No, we had them on our business cards.
Oh, you had them in your business cards?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not allowed to use your mobile on this show, huh, by the way?
But I need to look it up. Or someone else look it up. I don't have Wi-Fi or anything here.
All right. So,
but we had a lot of Top Gun quotes on our business cards.
Did Tom Cruise ever visit Facebook offices?
No. I mean, he probably did after I left, but not while I was there.
Okay. And how was the departure like, with Mark? Like, was he cool about it? Or was he upset that you're leaving? What was your equation then with him?
Both Mark and Priscilla, who's now his wife, were not cool with it. He was pretty upset. And when I left, Aditya also left. And then another Facebooker, Akhil, also left. And we started the company together. So they were not pleased. And it took a little bit of time for them to get over it. And then because the reality is that we were not leaving the company, we were leaving the family.
It felt like that.
It felt like that. And it felt like that to me also, but it also felt like that to them. It's like, how can you abandon us now?
Does Facebook really steal people's data?
I don't believe it can, and I don't think it does.
Why can't it? I mean, I'm giving it all of my personal information.
You're giving it from choice.
Exactly. Yeah, I know that. But people who give it from choice are also, in a way, alarmed about it. And it was sort of...
I mean, they're worried that, okay, that data is being used somewhere. That's the thing,
I don't think the data is used anywhere. Personally, I don't think it's used anywhere other than targeting advertisements to you.
Okay.
But I don't think they sell your data to anybody else.
Okay. And did Mark really anticipate some of the social issues that it's causing now?
No, because this goes back to the question that you asked earlier on, right? You asked me, did anybody think that Facebook could ever become so big? And the answer was no. And the reality is that if you didn't know that it was going to become so big, then how would you know it was going to cause these social issues? And I think it's also important to remember that while there have been some negative social issues, there have also been some positive political social movements, right? For example, the Egypt Spring happened because of Facebook and was organized on Facebook. And those were some positive elements. There was one campaign here in India that happened because of Facebook and on Facebook. I think it was called the Pink Chaddi campaign, where women rose up against rape in India. So again, while there have been negative social issues, there have also been positive social issues, but you don't hear that much about them. And I would say this again, if we knew it would become so big, maybe we would have anticipated some of these social issues, but we didn't. And therefore it was impossible to anticipate.
A lot of accusations on, platforms like, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and all being used by deep state to influence elections, etc. and all that. And this is not just in the US, it's world over.
Yeah.
There's always conspiracy theories. So what's the take on this? What's your personal take on this? I mean, can these platforms be used by deep state or, by a foreign country to, influence the elections in another country? And how does that happen?
I'll be completely honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think it can happen anymore.
Okay, why?
I think they've done a lot of work to lock things down.
So that means it could have happened earlier.
I have no idea.
Okay.
And the only reason I say this is because there have been so many congressional hearings and like so many regulations passed. So I know that things have been under lockdown, but I don't actually know the reasons why.
So speaking of congressional hearings, the one in which Mark appeared, there's a lot of talk after that he looked like a robot, that he's a robot, he's a cyborg, he's not human, he's an alien. Is that true?
I don't think so. I think he's a really, really nice, very generous person. And I think the most admirable quality about him is his capacity for learning. I have never met anybody who's constantly learning and has such an immense capacity for learning, which is why I think he is Mark.
What do you think of the Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, virtual arguments and fight on Twitter and all? Elon Musk keeps challenging him to a fist fight and all. What's happening with these two? Like, what's up with them?
Again, I have no comment on their relationship. Their relationship is their own to speak to, but I was following that thread independently. I think Elon...
You're just taking the piss.
I don't know what he was doing, but was challenging Mark to an MMA fight. And Mark has been practicing MMA. I know you practice martial arts. And Mark is also very into MMA, and you require a lot of discipline and practice to be good at it. And he's done a tremendous job at that. And rightfully so, has been posting a few of his videos of his progress, and then Elon suddenly pipes up that I'm going to challenge you to an MMA fight, which is kind of hilarious because Elon is probably about 200 pounds and Mark is maybe 150 pounds. I don't know. I don't have any comment on it. I think that when Mark accepted the challenge, Elon just backed out.
I think it was just for fun, right?
Probably, yeah.
Right. So after Facebook, once you started up with Kove. So what was Kove for? What was it? What was the purpose of Kove?
Yeah, I think initially we were Facebook is a fantastic platform for connecting individuals, for connecting people, but there really isn't a platform to connect groups of people. So people working in companies, or people working in private organizations, nonprofits, or even people participating in conferences like TED conferences. So we were building a real-time collaboration product to allow these people to communicate internally within their groups.
Sort of like an intranet.
Sort of like that.
A sophisticated one.
Yeah, the more current version or way of saying this is like a Slack.
Right. And then you set that up and then you sold that to Dropbox.
Right.
Right? Yeah. And then what? Then when you sold it to Dropbox, what was that? You had some, layoff time over there then?
No, I think the interesting thing is, I think maybe this is worth mentioning. I think about regrets a lot. And I kind of live my life in a way that, I don't want to have any regrets. But maybe the one regret that I have in my life is that I sold my company. And I think that was a cop-out for what it's worth. We had everything going for us. We had a great team. We had a great set of investors. We were actually building a very good product. And we had a few customers who were interested, and had we persevered, I think the company could have been really successful. And case in point, Slack started after us and was a very successful company. So I think we just didn't persevere. And that was the biggest mistake. And I think as a CEO, my biggest mistake was that people had hesitations and people had doubts. And as my job as a CEO is to drag everyone along for the ride. So realizing that there are a lot of ups and downs, and then if people want to opt out, people should opt out, but I should continue with the journey. Instead, what I did was I said, okay, let me sell this company and then I'll restart. And that was my biggest mistake, because restarting this act of building a company requires a lot of activation energy and a lot of emotional energy. It doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, I sold the company to Dropbox. That was a really successful financial outcome. There's no downtime or layoff time. My co-founder, took on the position of VP of engineering, CTO, and I took off the position of VP of operations. And we worked on making Dropbox successful.
Absolutely. And so I get your point where you're coming from, that, you regretted selling this company, and then you didn't want to, respend that entire energy, emotional, all those kinds of energies to try and build a new company, but yet you did. You started South Park Commons. Now, South Park Commons is a platform, as I understand, for people who are high up in the tech world to come in and, take a sabbatical and try and figure out what's next.
Yep.
Am I putting it right? Is that what SPC
It's pretty
is?
close. So here's the thing. I was at Dropbox for a few years, and then I left because my goal was always to start a company. So I left thinking that I would start a company. And when I decided to do it the second time around, I did not want to make the same mistake. Because I was convinced that if you are someone who is smart and you're willing to persevere, you will figure it out. So the first thing I did was I decided it was really important for me to build an environment that allowed me to persevere. And I went and I looked for 10 other people who were exactly like me. So they were technical, they were unemployed, and they were figuring out what they wanted to work on next. And not only that, they were accomplished individuals. So like either early engineers at Stripe, or had started companies like Meraki, or like had done something interesting in their past. And the idea was for these 10 people to come together and commit 20 hours a week to this group. And this group didn't have a name. And then when we got together, we were like, okay, what are we going to do for 20 hours?
This was all physical meetings.
These were all physical meetings. And till today, South Park Commons is all physical, because we believe that you can only catalyze ideas, and interesting collisions of like ideas and people can only happen if you're physically present, especially in this very nascent early stages. But back then, like the idea was like, we'll study topics that were on the forefront of technology. So in 2015, we were studying AI. And in 2015, there were only 20 AI papers published, which is kind of fascinating, because now, like every month, there are more than like 20 AI papers published.
Now you're getting AI to write those papers, right?
That's also happening. And when we were reading these papers, like, we would call these authors like Andre Karpathy and say like, hey, do you want to come talk to us? And he was like, oh, you're interested in what I'm working on? And we were like, hell yeah. So it was that early back then. And every month we would like study a topic like this. Eventually, this community kind of struck a chord with other technical folks in Silicon Valley. So from 10 people, we very quickly grew to 30 people. Then we had to move out of my living room, and I got like a physical office space. And then because we got that office space, we decided to name ourselves. And the act of simply naming ourselves basically gave us permission to say, we don't know what we're doing. We're unemployed, but we are actually taking the time to figure out what we want to do for the next 5 years. So it almost gave us permission to do that. And because everybody was doing it around us, and, we were all well-respected peers, we respected each other. It became an environment where, like, that was the norm. That's how you did things. You experimented with ideas, you built things, you failed quickly. You got a lot of active real-time feedback from those folks in the community. And eventually, like, you would ideate, you would build conviction, and like eventually build a company. So that is what South Park Commons became.
Right. But that time spent, in SPC, ideating, and people are unemployed, they're figuring out what to do. They were surviving on their past money,
their
savings, right?
Yeah.
So that was the only thing that kept them going for that period.
Yeah, and people made a lot of sacrifices. Like, some people chose not to get married. A lot of people lived with like roommates. There was one person at SPC who survived on a diet of Soylent. Have you guys heard of Soylent?
Not really. What's that?
It's like this, I don't even know if the company exists anymore, but it's like a company that says you can survive on these drinks and don't have to eat any food because
Really?
it's like fully nutritional. I mean, obviously this person
That's
felt
so
sick. Very odd. But it was affordable. So like,
So they made that kind of sacrifice just to survive and just to make it here.
Yeah.
So they believed in the whole SPC concept.
Yeah.
And where's SPC right now? Like, what's it now? What's it blossomed into now?
Yeah. So South Park Commons is a community for people who are figuring out what they want to work on next. We focus primarily on folks who are technical because we need a common vocabulary and a common language. We've had over 700 members who started about 200 companies. And we have offices in San Francisco, in New York, and we're opening up one in Bangalore because we strongly believe that these kinds of ideas and relationships can only be catalyzed in person.
Cool.
So I have a question regarding your entire journey up till now. Mental health is a big thing nowadays, and there's a lot of priority being given towards it. I want to know, what was your perception about mental health throughout the process? Did you ever face depression or feel suicidal?
I never felt suicidal. I don't know if I was ever depressed or not. And I think your dad can relate to this. I don't think mental health was a big thing when we were growing up. In fact, when I first came to the United States and when I first started working, and people would talk about like, therapists, a psychologist, I would laugh at the idea. I was like, why can't you just figure things out for yourself? Like, why are you so weak? And so for me, it was like never really a thing. But I'm more and more convinced that it actually is a thing, that being mentally healthy is important. So for example, like, my husband and I, we see a couples therapist, not because we need to, but because we like to. And we think that, it's one of the best things for our marriages. And we have been seeing her for like the last 5 years.
Okay.
So I do believe in it. And I think like, it serves different purposes for different people.
So I have some questions regarding AI, but before I get into that, I just have a question regarding self-help.
Yeah.
Self-help nowadays is a very big thing, which is good because people are trying to prioritize themselves also. Now, one question I have in particular is about books. Whenever I ask somebody plus minus 5 years of my age of whether or not you read, I never get a yes or no answer. I get that, oh yes, so I'm trying to read basically 300 words per minute. This is my sub-vocalization rate right now. I'm trying to finish 5 books within a week. What are your thoughts on that?
Who's understanding that is? I think it's just crazy.
I think it's crazy. I can't even read like 5 books a month. So a week sounds kind of crazy.
Did you read when you were going through this entire process?
I read a lot when I was younger. I don't read that much anymore. And I think my reading has been supplemented by the internet. And AI.
Do you really associate reading with being successful? Because people say that all successful people read, but not all readers are successful.
I think all successful people have an insane capacity to learn. They're very open-minded about learning. And learning can happen in many different ways. Reading is a primary source of learning, but learning can happen through osmosis as well. So for example, like one of the things I love about SPC is that is my mode of learning. Because in SPC, we have a lot of domain experts. Like, we'll have a biotech expert. We'll have like a mental health expert. We'll have like a doctor. We'll have like a lot of AI experts. We'll have like an AI reading club. And like, I want to participate in that reading club because I actually hate reading. But the reading club helps me stay, like I'm beholden to them. Like, I kind of have to stay on top of the reading so I can participate in the discussions. And I learn through osmosis, through those discussions. So that's another way to learn, for example. And I think I'm pretty current on a lot of things because of that modality of learning. Other folks learn through like, listening, audio. So I do think that it is important, but it is a means to learn.
Which is why I will now ask you about what do you think of today's education system?
I have a lot of thoughts on it.
It's shit.
I mean, I'll tell you what I want for my own children. My own children go to a very small school. So I do believe very strongly in personalized learning. I think the flip side of something like that is like they lack a lot of social interactions, which you get in large group settings. I think that when my child is college ready, I would very strongly prefer for him or her to take a year off. From my own experiences, I feel like if I had spent a year working, I would be able to relate to the education more. I would know how to apply it. It would make more sense to me. I would understand like why I was studying it instead of just studying it and getting good grades. So I have a strong preference that my child takes a break, like almost a year, and works in different environments before they start school. And it doesn't need to be directly related to the subject matter that they're going to study, but I think that real world experience provides context for why they're studying. And I would hope the same happens throughout their careers as they study. I also think that there are books that I would like them to read. And these are like, fictional books or biographical books that again helps put things into context. So for me, like when I was in college, I read this book that really moved me. It was called The Soul of a New Machine. And it was talking about like building chips and computers like back in the day, and the competition that the different companies had, and like this whole concept about like people were sleeping on their desks and building things. And it really spoke to me because like I felt energized by it. Like I felt like I could be that person. And it again put that education in context for me.
Right.
So like like those kinds of things I think are really inspiring. So those are the kinds of things that I would want for my children.
Okay. Speaking of books and the movie we spoke about, The Social Network, there is a narrative that is sort of being romanticized now, that I don't want to work for anybody. I want to live life on my own terms. I don't want to live life paycheck to paycheck. I want to escape the matrix. I want to have my own company. Where do you actually see this rolling out? And basically, what advice would you give to the youth if someone comes and tells you that I hate jobs, I hate that 9 to 5 narrative, I don't want any of that, I just want my own company?
I think what matters most is maybe let's rephrase it. I think different people have different motivations.
Yeah, I'm just saying a general narrative.
So if you want to make money, I think it's easier to make money to find a company that's going through a hypergrowth startup and like ask for equity in the company in exchange for your work. That is the easiest way to make money. And it's a short way of making money. So, like most companies go through this kind of a growth rate, successful companies. So you want to find a company where you're in that just right before it takes off, like in that
on the cusp of taking off.
Yeah, just on the cusp of taking off. And then instead of like, negotiating salary, you should negotiate for equity in the company, which you can today in tech companies. And that's the easiest way of making money. So if that is your goal, that is what you should do. Starting a company, like 99.99% of companies fail. So the likelihood of your company succeeding is very, very low. So starting a company is actually the worst way of making money. So that like, people should like educate themselves and study like what has happened in the market before they make that kind of decision. Now, there are some people who are just like terrible at working for other people. I'm actually one of them. Like I was a terrible employee. I've been told 100 times that you're impossible to manage, but I was a very productive employee. So I did a lot for companies and I produced a lot of work, but I was just like a horrible person to manage.
Why is that?
I was just difficult. I like to do things my own way. Like, if I set my mind to something, I would do it. Like with Mark, like, if I disagreed with him, like, my God, the number of arguments we've had, I would just like blatantly argue. Like, sometimes I would just say, no, I'm not going to do it. Like you don't want an employee like that. You want an employee to do what you want them to do. So I was like one of those kind of people. And like, I don't think I ever really had a real manager at Facebook. I maybe had 22 different ones. Not because I was a terrible employee, but because the management would keep changing.
Yeah.
So like ultimately I felt like I was kind of working for myself, so I could do whatever I wanted, which I did. So that was like, that's like, there's that kind of person, and that kind of person should probably go and try to start something on their own, because like that's the only environment that they can work in.
Okay.
But the main reason to start something on their own is like, you feel passionate about solving a problem, like you're willing to make the sacrifices, you understand what it takes. Like you kind of are doing a top-down analysis of like, what is the market? Like, what is the go-to-market in something? Like, what are the possible products you can build? Like, you're in that mental state where you can do those things to start a company. And that is actually what like SPC helps you do.
Okay. What is Facebook's perspective on metaverse right now? Because there was a lot of hype around that during COVID.
I don't know. All I know is the company is now called Meta and not Facebook. Facebook is just one of the products that Meta offers. I believe they're still investing in the metaverse. They're still investing in their headsets. I don't think that vision has gone away. I think they continue to work on it.
Okay. Where do you see AI really going? Do you really see it becoming like the Terminator movie and extinguishing mankind, or do you see it doing something else?
I think AI is here to stay.
Yeah.
I think AI is going to help humanity in all the ways that we've imagined and even more. I don't think this is a thing that's happening in the future. I think it's happening today. I think most of the products that you use online are driven in some way by AI. I think that people just didn't understand or know that till like ChatGPT launched and they were like chatting with a bot.
What are your thoughts on ChatGPT right now?
I think it's wonderful. I think it's an incredible feat of technology. I mean, to be honest, like as a technologist, as an engineer, this is the most incredible time. Like, I think we are living in a time where the entire world is going to change. Your business, which is a cooling business, is going to undoubtedly change in the next 10 years because of AI. It doesn't matter which vertical you're working in, it's all going to change. And that is just, it's thrilling. It's like exciting in many ways. Now, that said, the technology is really powerful. So are there going to be like some bad like effects as a result of it? Yeah, which is why like there's a whole field of AI safety to help with it. I think technologists have learned their lessons from the past, and like, you know, the questions you were asking, like, did you ever envision Facebook would become so big or would have such an impact? Kind of learning from our lessons from the past. And like, while we are optimists, because as a technologist, you have to remain optimist, we are also wary, which is again why like this whole field of AI safety exists.
Right.
But there's a tweet I read recently which says that, you know, there's some lady who tweeted that, you know, I want AI to do my dishes and laundry rather than writing my poems and doing my art, so that I can, you know, do my art and poems and all that, and not the dishes.
I think we'll eventually get there. I think robotics is like, you know, one of the next waves of AI. I think it's a little bit further than we anticipate, but we'll eventually get there. I mean, but just imagine, like, we've built this system. Nobody actually knows how the system works. Not even the AI engineers.
That's the problem, no?
Nobody knows how the system works. And it's a self-learning system. And it is insane. I mean, think about this, like, I'll give you a very simple example, right? Like, people are like, do you think only the big companies can leverage AI and use AI? I'm like, hell no. And they were like, why? Like, why do you think like, you know, someone new or like a startup can build something interesting in AI? I was because the first time in almost like a decade and a half, you can imagine, you can build for the future. You can imagine like, you know, how am I as a person, as an individual, as a consumer going to live 5 years in the future? Right? And you can build for that future. Now, bigger companies are so entrenched in their ways, it's going to be hard for them to change so quickly. So think about it this way. To search the internet, you've always used Google, right? You always use Google. And then suddenly, like in the year 2023, something like Perplexity launches. Have you guys used Perplexity?
I haven't.
It's another way of like searching the internet. It's like a chat bot. And what I will tell you today is like, never in my life did I think I would stop using Google. Can you guys imagine stopping to use Google?
Not now. No, definitely not.
Exactly. What does your life look like? But right now,
I've never used Google.
That's crazy. How do you search the internet?
I always ask my wife for anything. She gives me all the answers.
Well, that is also Google.
Yeah.
But that said, I only use Google 50% of the time and I use Perplexity 50% of the time. That is a big, big shift.
But you feel that it's better? Like, you know, you feel...
Yeah, of course. Because I was searching for swim coaches for my son, my 7-year-old son, Avyan, in San Francisco. And it's very hard for some reason to find a swim coach in San Francisco. So I decided what I would look for is tell me all the swim teams for children between the ages of 7 to 10 in and around San Francisco. Okay. Now, if I did this in Google, it would give me a set of links and then I would have to click on each link. Then I would have to find the name of the team. No, forget the best one, name of the team. Then I would have to find the manager of the team. Then I would have to find a telephone number and then I would call the number to get the coach. When I did this search on Perplexity, it gave me a result saying, these are all the swim teams. This is where it's located. This is the name of the manager of the swim teams and this is the telephone number.
So the search output is better.
Of course, it's much, much better. But it's not just the output. It kind of understood the context of the question that I was asking, the kind of information that I needed.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. So I use Perplexity all the time. But, you know, it's what I'm trying to explain to you is that, so you would understand, like if I told you you would use Google half as much as you did in the past, you would never believe me. but it's already happening. And then if I tell you like, this is how you're going to live 5 years from now, you'll never believe me, but it will happen.
Okay.
So I want to step back into SPC, South Park Commons, where you mentioned. So I got the impression that SPC is more of a platform or a community where people come together and they discuss ideas and all, which are more or less tech related, is what I understand. But then you also mentioned that there are doctors and psychiatrists, and what are they doing there?
So SPC, 70%, we think a lot about community composition. So 80% of the members are technical, they write code. And when I say they're technical and they write code, they're not like me. Like, I studied computer science. Like, I was coding maybe like the last time I wrote a line of code was maybe 8 years ago. And I haven't written any lines of code today. They actually actively write code. So that's 80% of the community. 70% of the community wants to start a company. And 30% of the community does not want to start a company. And 80% is technical, but 20% are experts. So we've had like, Olympians in the community. Like we've had like someone who won the decathlon event twice and got the gold medal in the Olympics. And like, those are like the best athletes because they win like 10 events. We had a lot of Olympic rowers in the community. Like I said, we've had the biotech experts and so on and so forth. And the reason is that when you want to catalyze ideas, you need like a mix of people. And when you ask someone like me, who's an experienced entrepreneur, hey, do you want to hang out with another startup founder? I'm like, yeah, kind of. It's kind of interesting. But if you say like, hey, do you want to hang out with this person who built like, who's an expert at building data systems? I'm like, hell yeah. Like, I'm going to learn something interesting from this person. So we think a lot about community composition that way, which is why we have like these different types of people at SPC.
All right. Another question I had is like, he talked about mental health, and I have seen that over the years, so many of these big techpreneurs from the Valley have been coming to India for, spiritual reasons, like, Steve Jobs. Even I think Mark Zuckerberg came and met someone. And Neem Karoli Baba is one of them who they used to go to. So what's up with that? Like, why do they come to India only for that? Like, why don't they have it out there?
I don't think they come to India.
Why can't you build a community of spiritual gurus through SPC or in that country? Why do they have to come all the way to India to seek that? What's special about India?
I think that's a great question. First of all, I don't know if all of them come to India. I cannot speak for them. I can speak for myself. My roots are in India. It is actually really fascinating that my son, I feel like coming out of the womb, has been spiritual. He likes to like say all the shlokas. He likes to do, and I'm not like religious or spiritual in that way. He likes to do all the pujas. Like he looks at YouTube and like, figures out how to do it. Like here, his only one request is I want to do a full proper puja in a temple. And I don't know where like he gets that from. Like, he went to like Crossroads, and like the book he bought was like some guru here in Pune. It's called Energize Your Mind. I forget the name of the guru, and he's only 7 years old. I think that coming back to your question about like, why do founders seek out spirituality as like, they mature and they age? I think it's very much part of like what I was talking about. I think the best and most successful entrepreneurs are constantly learning. And like, after you've achieved the fame and after you've made the money and after you've like made all the impact that you want to make, you kind of question what's next. And I think spirituality plays a big role at that point.
The ultimate answer, right?
Yeah.
It's the final answer.
Yeah. And I think that is why people seek out spirituality. And like, whether it's like meditation and all of these other things that we're learning about now, like it is a way of us, like, looking internal, like finding methods and means to like calm ourselves down, our minds down, like, refresh.
Inner engineering. Inner engineering.
Yeah, inner engineering. So I think it's become a really big thing now. And I think a lot of the roots of what we're learning today actually do stem from India. So if they do stem from India, then like obviously people want to go to the root to see what that's like.
So you spoke about South Park Commons being a sort of community for people to come together and think about what's the next level stuff you're doing. So what's next?
I can't tell you what's next because that's going to come from our community members. And again, if I could, I would be the oracle. But I can tell you about what we're building that's super exciting. One of the companies that came out of SPC is called Luma.
Sorry, it's called?
Luma, Luma. And they recently launched a video foundation model, very similar to Sora that, OpenAI launched and announced. But this one is actually better. And you should go there and try to make videos. It's way better, and it's publicly available. And that's huge, because then if you think about people creating content, and you talk about all these platforms, you talk about generative AI and people being creative, it's a massive tool that you can use to build generative content. So that's super exciting. I think that there are a lot of companies building agents, and agents are the next step in AI that will do work for you. But there's a thesis, some people at SBC have a thesis that these agents are using the wrong foundation models, and we need to build foundation models specific for agents. And that's super exciting, because when you talk about the future and people doing your work for you, and what does that look like? That is basically agentic behavior. So that's very, very exciting. You spoke about mental health. Mental health therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists are not easily and readily available for everyone. They're also quite expensive because they're not necessarily covered by insurance, so you have to self-pay. But a lot of mental health is about communication and being able to articulate your feelings and identify them. And the initial versions of that can be solved by AI, an AI that's learning about it. But so there's a huge, almost revolution in not solving mental health, but aiding mental health using AI. So there's just a lot of exciting things. And then ultimately I'll say that, every vertical we talked about, your business, which is Coolants. And
we're in the business of being cool. That's it.
Oh, you're in the business of being cool?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in the business of being hot. let's be clear. So every single vertical, it doesn't really matter which one it is, it's going to be impacted by AI in some way or the other. And again, being able to think about what we want that future to be is extremely exciting. So we see a lot of those things at SPC.
Okay. So you also mentioned in through SPC, there have been 200 companies that have come out, etc. Any unicorns, any soonicorns over there? And what's a soonicorn?
A soonicorn is a term that I learned in Bangalore, and a soonicorn is a soon-to-be unicorn. Okay. So not yet a unicorn.
But any unicorns out of SPC?
Yeah, there are a couple of unicorns out of SPC. And again, it means really nothing because they're privately valued. So ultimately, yeah, they're billion-dollar companies, but again, with private valuations. So there are quite a few unicorns.
But they'll explode soon, I'm sure.
I hope so.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I hope so.
So, I think this has been a great episode, but I want to ask, before I end it up, I just want to ask you one thing that, what's happening with YouTube? Is it going to be around, or is there an alternative coming up for that also?
I don't actually know the question.
Through SPC, is there anyone talking about building something better than YouTube?
YouTube is not a generative content play. YouTube is a aggregation platform that distributes content. So I think what YouTube has, which is very difficult to rebuild, is a distribution mechanism. And it's the same with Instagram, and it's the same with TikTok. And I would put YouTube in the same category as Instagram and TikTok. So it's more of a distribution platform than it is a generation platform. Yeah.
Right.
I'll be frank, I haven't really seen anybody at SPC building a replacement for YouTube as a distribution platform.
But if you were to build something different, what would you do?
If I was to build something different, what would I build?
To better YouTube.
Oh, to better YouTube itself.
Or a platform to that.
I don't know. Haven't thought about it.
All right. So I think we'll need some AI over here to try and think what we need to do with YouTube.
Perfect.
And I'm going to end this episode here because you have a flight to catch back to Frisco, back to, the pronouns and, the he, they, them, they.
I'm a she, her.
You're a she, her. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up and I want to thank you for coming. But I also want to say one thing that, AI, maybe I'm old school, but it scares me a little because it always brings me back to Skynet. In Terminator, where, AI takes over everything and it self-learns, the system self-learns, and it just says that, humans are not needed and starts eliminating all the humans. So that's what I'm worried about. So, I just hope that SPC is cautious in what they do, because, it is a little scary for me at least. But thank you for coming, and have a safe flight back.